There can be only one edible plant that is so synonymous with the British summer season growing, and that's the humble tomato. And today I'm going to go through some of the things about tomatoes that you probably need to know in the talky bit in a minute, and then I'm going to show you the seeds that I'm sowing and how I plan to grow them, and some of the little tricks and things that I've used over the years to gain an edge on the growing season and to hopefully increase my harvest. So we'll crack on now, we'll go and do the talky bit. Okay, right from the start with growing tomatoes, when you start looking at varieties of tomatoes that you would like to grow, when you start talking to other gardeners about it, you're going to hear certain or various terms. Now the first two I want to talk about are determinate and indeterminate. Now don't worry, I'll put all this on a little graphic later so that you can grab screen grab later to save it if you want more or you want to keep that information. But basically determinate are the bush tomatoes. These will grow to sort of around about this sort of height, and they are essentially a bush. Now the indeterminate are the Cordon variety, or what they call vining tomatoes. So they grow up and they continue growing, and in the right conditions they can reach 20 foot or more. Now you'll never grow them to that, you're not wanting to. You'll only ever grow them to 5 or 6 foot around there. But that's what the capability of those tomatoes is. And when you see the commercial growers growing them, they will grow them up that tall and along supports, and they'll even drop the plant down so that you've got 3 or 4 foot of stem on the floor. But as I say, you're never going to do that in a home or in an allotment garden. You're only ever going to grow them, as what they say, 4 or 5 trusses tall. We'll get into that in a minute. So that's your indeterminate. It's your cordon or your vining tomatoes, and the ones that grow straight up, and you train them up a cane. You will want a cane or two to support a bush tomato, otherwise it can flop over in wind. Next you've got indoor or outdoor. Now this depends quite honestly on where in the country or where in the world you're growing them and what sort of protection you can afford those plants. If you're in a sheltered position and you get a nice warm summer, you can probably get away with growing tomatoes outdoors. I can to a point, but my harvest is about half of what I would get indoors. So I tend to grow most of my tomatoes undercover in the polytunnels, and last year I grew them in here and in my new polytunnel just over there. So there's a couple of different types of tomatoes straight away. So you've got your determinates and your indeterminates. On the whole, most people and most tomatoes for sale, most tomato seeds, will be the indeterminate variety, the ones that grow up a cane and you train them in. Now, in each of those varieties, there are different types of tomatoes, and they're almost quite self-explanatory. For instance, you've got a cherry tomato, obviously the size of a cherry, a salad tomato, which will be a little bit bigger, and then it starts to get a bit vague. And I've heard of tomatoes being called slicing tomatoes. I mean, I'll slice a tomato, a salad tomato or a cherry tomato, but they're just different classifications of where that breeder thinks his or her product fits in with that market. Now I'm growing a few this year. I'm growing some cherries, some normal tomatoes, which is what I call the mid-sized ones, and also some of the big beefier tomatoes, the much bigger ones, paste tomatoes. So that's a little bit of information. Now when it comes to sowing your seeds, you want to be sowing them at a time of the year where you can maintain a good temperature for them. And once the seeds have come out of the soil and you potted them on, where those plants will be able to survive to carry on before you're ready to plant them out later in the year. Now, one thing to bear in mind with tomatoes is they prefer a temperature of over 10 degrees centigrade. If the temperature drops below 10, say to 5 degrees, it won't kill them, but it will stall that plant. It will stop it temporarily. If you can imagine it, it's like, oh, it's cold and I've had enough of this, and it will just stay like that until it warms up again, and then it will continue growing. So if that happens to you, what you can do the following year is, if you make notes and keep notes of what happened, you had a cold spell and your tomatoes were growing and they got cold shocked, and some of the leaves might turn sort of purpley colour, or some of the leaves might even die. The plant will continue, but you won't get the best harvest from it. it will have been stopped. So if that happens to you, then the next year just sow your seeds a little bit later. Now, as growing up as a lad and with my granddad and going to various allotment sites and things as a child, most seeds weren't started, or most seeds weren't sown until about May time. The start of May was the time for tomatoes, and because we didn't really have propagators, or even to a point, not many folk had greenhouses in those days. They were very few and far between. So we had to start them at a time where the plants could be protected. So that's what we did then. And this year I'm doing a similar thing. I'm going to sow some tomatoes today, and I'm going to do something a bit different with them, but I'm also going to sow some in May as a comparison later on. But anyway, just bear those things in mind, that if you want to get tomatoes going and you haven't got protection, then just wait. It is very early in the year, and I'm only sowing them today because I'm going to use them in a slightly different way, which you'll see when I come to sow the seeds in a minute, and we'll talk about them. So you've got your bush tomatoes, your determinate, your indeterminate, your vining tomatoes, or your Cordon varieties, and here's a graphic now that puts all that in place. Right, on with the seed sowing. Well, the sun's come out, so I thought I'll come out here and sow the seeds, but these are what I'm sowing this year for my tomato seeds. And I've got 4 little quarter-sized trays, and these will all go on my propagator at home with a domed lid on, just to keep the humidity up in them. You could use these seed trays, which you can buy separately from a propagator with the lids, and just pop them on your windowsill and they'll germinate fine. I've got the propagator, I'm going to use it. So anyway, the first seed I'm going to sow is one I last tried a few years ago. Didn't really work out for me. It's a big tomato, they're great big things. And this is one called the Jersey Devil. Now, our American friends across the water there may know this one. If they don't, they'll certainly know its ancestor, the Jersey Giant, which is what this one originated from. It's a big paste tomato, and what that means is the flesh of a tomato is just under the skin, and it surrounds all the goop that's on the inside, all the wet stuff and the seeds. And with the paste tomato, there's just more of it. It's a thicker walled tomato, thicker fleshed tomato, and they're that much bigger as well. So it's great for making things like passatas and sauces. So with these bigger sort of, I would class it alongside the beefsteak tomatoes, another big type of tomato, where they do need a long season, and they do need a good season to develop well and to get a crop off. I normally fail with the bigger tomatoes, so I don't normally grow them, but I'm trying again this year, and we'll see how that works out for me. So that's that one. Not holding out much hope for that, but these are my main tomatoes. And the first one, this is a cracker. This is Ildi, and it's a little sort of orangey yellow tomato. Now, on your tomato plants, as the plant itself is growing, you get the leaf coming out of the stem. Then the next thing that comes out will be a truss. Now the truss it's a bit like a bunch of grapes, but it's a bunch of tomatoes. Now each truss on an Ildi can be anywhere between 60 to 80 fruits per truss, just little ones like this, but they're great for salads. And the great thing, and the thing I really like about this one, is that at the end of the season, if they haven't all fully ripened, you can just take the truss off whole and hang that in your shed, and it will carry on ripening and will store very well for a couple of months. And so you can be eating fresh tomatoes in November or even into December. So that's also a very good one. It's quite a popular variety as well. Anyway, so that's that one. So those two done. Now these are the ones that I do something different with overall, and this first one is actually new to me. Tell a lie, really. I bought this variety 4 or 5 years ago, and I've never grown it yet. It's Black Prince, and it's an early fruiting variety, which ties in with this next one that I'll be sowing in a minute. It's a sort of a chocolatey brown colour, medium-sized tomato, and I don't know anything more about it than that, apart from it's a Russian variety. But I wanted to grow it, and I bought it because it's early fruiting. So that's those three. Now this last one is one of my favourites. It's I don't know if you can see that, Crimson Crush. This variety was bred for outdoor growing, which suits me fine, because up here in the north, where it can be a little bit cold and the temperatures can be a little bit dodgy, I grow this outdoor variety indoors to guarantee a crop. But again, because this one's early fruiting, what I like to do with this one is to grow it early, and then as the side shoots develop on the plants, as the plant's growing up, I take them off and plant them, and it gives me extra plants. Now again, because the variety is early, they will fruit early, the side shooted plants, and that gives me 2 harvests from the one plant. So that's a great thing to do. Now, if you've ever noticed when you're growing tomato plants, if you go and take all the side shoots off them like you're supposed to do with indeterminate varieties, which this is, they're all indeterminates. If you take the side shoots off on a Monday and you miss one, and by Friday it can be like this, it grows with such a vigour. Well, I noticed this I suppose quite a few years ago now, and generally one of the ones that you tend to miss is the one right at the very base of the plant where the soil is. And I noticed when I took one off, I had to burrow down into the soil to take it off, and it already had roots on. So I planted it and it grew and I got a harvest, and that's how this developed. So now I do it deliberately every year. I take the side shoots off, plonk them straight into the soil, and I get 3 plants and I get a second harvest. And that for me is brilliant. As I say, because they're early fruiting, they both grow and get to a harvest very, very quickly. And I actually think that the side shoot plants actually grow a lot better, because they seem to have a lot more vigour in them than the actual main plants. But this year also, I've harped on a couple of times in videos this year about how we never used to sow seeds until sort of the start of May. So what I'm going to do is, these are the tomato Crimson Crush now that I'm growing for the side shoots to grow on as a second harvest. In May, the start of May, I'm going to sow a second batch of Crimson Crush to grow straight from seed, and just to see between the 3, the early started one, the side shoot plants, and the seed sown ones in May, what the difference is, if any. And just noted, this is just for my own personal thing. It's not trying to prove a point or anything, just trying to have a look at the difference between each and see where we go. Well, there we go, that's my lineup for this year. It's tomato Jersey Devil, which is a bit of an outside hope, tomato Ildy, which is brilliant because you can store them a long time after, and then the 2 early fruiting varieties, which I'm going to take side shoots off both. That's the Black Prince, chocolate brown colour, and the old familiar Crimson Crush, one of my favourites. So there we go. But that's it for today. Look after yourselves, everyone. Take care, stay safe, go sow some seeds. I'll see you soon. Ta-ra now.